Okay, welcome back again, and it's great to see that our group is getting even larger. So something magic is going on here. So, and because I'm afraid to stumble upon my words and my thoughts by introducing Annett now, I'm going to read something that I wrote yesterday while preparing this session, and because we had a little swap, so I'm going to improvise a little bit, but okay. There's much that can and probably should be said about Annett, but rather than reading your long publication list, which is nevertheless worth looking at, as it covers a wide range of topics and reflects Annett's unchained mind, it really is, I would like to take this opportunity now, here, as we are all together, to say thank you. Over the past 4 years, while working together on our great Torah project, and I'm getting a little bit sentimental now, we have spent a lot of time working, thinking, and laughing together, often going beyond our limits. And I have to say, Annett has the ability to develop pioneering ideas and turn them into great projects by great effort. And the fact that we are all together on this beautiful island in the middle of a lot of water and storm, which is great, is actually one result of her great passion and energy. She's a real marathon runner, after all. So, Annett, I would like to thank you for 4 years of inspiring collaboration. It has been a pleasure to ride with you the big wave of Tagin research and Torah Scrolls. So we are just jumping to our main subject within the project, namely Torah Scrolls. And despite stressful times and bureaucratic madness you mostly faced, because German bureaucracy is sheer madness, I can tell you, and Anna can even tell you more, maybe after more than 3 hours. Polish, French. So we have like a battle here going on between different kinds of madness. So, because, okay, nevertheless, despite all this madness and obstacles, and it was nevertheless a wonderful time, and I really, really hope, fingers crossed, that our journey somehow will continue. We'll see on which wave we are going to surf. So, and because of flowers are not so appropriate to deliver right now, because we are on travel, we thought, because Anna, we really love the Rhodian honey. So my host at the hotel, she recommended me a little store in the old city. So we went there today morning to get the Rhodian honey. So because Annett is so sweet.
Thank you. We have to say our project will end in 2 months, so we are kind of starting this soon. Oh wow. So I'm a little more emotional, sorry. So I hope you are not too tired to dive into our favorite.
Just set the camera. camera because they just see
Oh,
your
okay.
scarf.
Yes, but
It's very nice.
it's nice. Just so yeah, they have to maybe. Yeah, no, it's okay. I think. No, so I would like to dive together with you in the wonderful Torah Scroll, which I had the opportunity to look at in Buenos Aires, in the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires. And for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to it from now on as Rhodes Scroll or Rhodos Scroll, something so, because it's just, you know. And in this presentation, I would like to discuss the challenges and possibilities of dating Torah scrolls in general and our Rhodes Scroll or Rhodos Scroll in particular. So, looking at the material features of Torah scrolls, one notices the Scribes' serious endeavor to avoid any changes. The nature of parchment, the composition of ink, the script, the shape of the letters have undergone some changes since late antiquity. However, in contrast to the submission of the Hebrew Bible or the Megillot, as we saw, scribes have successfully resisted. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. yes, it's okay. Successfully resisted. Sorry, it's now I lost my the temptation of book artistry from surrounding cultures, such as magnificent illuminations or artistic calligraphy, always reflecting a particular regional tradition and artistic period. The uniform appearance of ritually pure Torah scrolls and their anachronistic method of production have contributed significantly and continue to do so today to the creation and maintenance of a sense of safety, community, and religious identity in Jewish societies, even across large geographical distances. But for us as manuscript researchers, this appearance of the scrolls, which seems detached from time and space and place, presents a huge challenge. Most of the datings of Torah scrolls provided in library catalogues have been estimated without the aid of material analysis, which means that they should be treated with some caution. With regard to our Rhodes Scroll, we had to deal with another unusual circumstance. The age of the manuscript has been determined twice by carbon-14 analysis. The results of these measurements, however, lie about 450 years apart. In 2001, a laboratory in Buenos Aires settled on the year 1210 with error tolerance of 110 years. It is 1100 to 1320, which is already a large time span. And last year, the Kurt Engelhorn Center of Archaeometry in Mannheim, Germany, conducted a new analysis of a piece of parchment from the scroll that I was allowed to take with me from Buenos Aires, with the result that it most likely dates from between 1533 and 1636. In my presentation, I do not want to delve into the details of probability theory and the pitfalls and limitations of materials research. I lack the expertise to do so. Instead, I would rather attempt to approach the genesis of this Torah scroll using conventional methods of codicology and as of yet rather unconventional methods of paleography. To this end, the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, which we were quite obsessed in our project, of this manuscript will serve as central arguments for a dating that makes the accuracy of one of the two C14 measurements appear more plausible. So let us examine and go step by step into the characteristics of a Torah scroll that may lead us to the place and the time of its genesis. A closer look at the writing material allows us to exclude Ashkenazi region as the place of origin. The relatively dark material is revealed, more comparable to leather, differing from the parchment used in the Ashkenazi cultural area in its methods of production. Veil is much closer to the Talmudic ideas of a kosher writing material, and we will learn more about it later from May. The notion of pauses only took on a consistent form in the 12th century with the religious authority of Moses Maimonides. Maimonides referred to the famous Aleppo Codex, a 10th century Bible manuscript with Masoretic commentary, which is considered the most reliable source in biblical research for the biblical text and vocalization and the Masoretic apparatus, and maybe also the cantillation, but I'm not sure about this. Maimonides' rules quickly became a standard in Sepharad and in the North African cultural area. And in the course of the 14th century, they also gained more and more influence in the Jewish communities of Christian Europe. According to Maimonides, the open section called Petucha is defined as a space that extends beyond the line and continues on to the next line with a total width of 9 letters. If the space at the end of the line is too small, the entire line must be left blank. A closed pause stoma is located within a line and, according to Maimonides, should be 9 letters wide. The scribe of our Rhodes scroll adheres to this Maimonidean rule and, at least in my spot checks, shows no variations from the Maimonidean specification in terms of the number and placement of the pauses, of these pauses. The presentation of the Song of Sea also follows Maimonides, who specified: the Song of the Sea is written in 30 lines. The first line is normal, while the rest are as follows. One line has an empty space in the middle, while the next line has 2 empty spaces, so that the line is divided into 3, and so that there is a space opposite a writing part and writing opposite each space. Unfortunately, we cannot verify the representation of the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, as our Rhodes scroll only contains the biblical text up to Numbers 8:25 in readable condition. The end is severely damaged and certainly contains only a few chapters of Numbers, so Deuteronomy is missing entirely. So what we can say at this point is that our scribe was most likely familiar with the explanations of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, and this Halakhic work was written between 1170 and 1180 in Fustat, ancient Cairo, and quickly established itself in North Africa, especially in Egypt and the Maghreb, and the authoritative code in Jewish law. In Spain, the work reached the rabbinical and intellectual circles of Catalonia and Aragon somewhat later, approximately at the beginning of the 13th century. So let's jump into the beginning of the columns. There is a non-binding tradition according to which 6 columns of a Torah scroll should begin with a specific word. For this phenomenon, the mnemonic Beyashemot, an acronym formed of the first letters of all 6 words, has been handed down to us. Interestingly, there are regional variations. While Beit always stands for Bereshit in the beginning, Hey for Habaim, and Vav for the word Ve'aidah, Yud could be assigned to the initial letter of the word Yehuda, or in Oriental tradition to the word Yoduka, they praise you, in the same verse. The Shin was considered in Ashkenazi and Sephardic Scribal circles to be the first letter of the word Shemor, but in the Oriental cultural sphere for the word Shoftim, judges, and the Mem in Ashkenazi and Sephardic regions for Matovu, or in Oriental cultural sphere for Motza. Our Rhodes Scroll follows the Sephardic and Ashkenazic tradition with Bereshit, Habaim, Yehuda, Shemor. We cannot verify the last two words because, as already mentioned, the scroll is incomplete. Finally, an analysis of the script, which clearly speaks as a Sephardic dialect. As you can see, as I put some examples from other cultural regions, ruled out its origin in Middle East, Yemen, and probably also North Africa. The fact that the neck of the lamed is without a little flag, or that the tail of the previous letter can be seen under the yud, is unfortunately not, as Rabbi David Rue at the homepage of the Jewish Museum here in Rhodes wrote, explains, an indication for the manuscript's very old age. This phenomenon can still be found in Sephardic Torah manuscripts from the 16th and even the 18th century. Similarly, the number of lines our scroll has, 45 lines, was standardized only at later stages. Therefore, we can assume that the scribe of our Rhodes Scroll follows a Sephardic writing tradition that was established on the Iberian Peninsula in the 13th century and based on Maimonides guidelines, and has continued in the Sephardic diaspora. With regard to dating, however, we are still between our two C14 measurements between 1300 and 1700. So we're still at the beginning. I would like to propose a method that has not yet been used to further narrow down the age of the scroll, namely by means of an analysis of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. So it's like an experiment. It is a paleographic characteristic of the Jewish scriptural tradition that some letters of the highly standardized square script of the scrolls are decorated with crowns, Tagin, or are written in an unusual way, Otiyyot Meshunnot. The Talmud specifies the seven letters Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Ein, Nun, Tzad, Shin for these unusual decorations. However, medieval manuscripts from the 12th to the 16th centuries, there are some later examples, especially in Megillot, I've seen something, show numerous acceptations of this ancient restriction, as well as a remarkable wealth of new ornate forms. Ashkenazi and Sephardic legal scholars regarded the unusual curves, arcs, flags, dashes as a threat to the authentic script of liturgical scrolls and insisted on uniformity. But even the early medieval set of rules known as Sefer Tagin, the Book of Crown, which is widely accepted in scribal circles and provided copyists with a precise list of words and letters for such modification, could not dampen the enthusiasm for this letter decoration. A growing number of treatises on the correct forms of the letters and crowns, and not least the medieval artifacts themselves, bear witness to the unbroken heyday of this phenomenon, which could only be standardized from the 16th century on. Parallel to this unusual writing practice, a rich exegetical tradition developed that interpreted the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot as well as the letter forms from rabbinical, mystical or philosophical perspectives. So the variations in form and placement and eventually the canonization of Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot can be observed over a period of about 500 years. In scrolls, in Halakhic works, regulating this paleographic tradition, but also in biblical codices, which probably served as templates for scribes. In the following, I would like to take a closer look at the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot of our Rhodes scroll, and on the one hand compare them with other Sephardic Torah scrolls from the Middle Ages and early modern period. On the other hand, I want to open the discussion to scribal literature with Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. So, first of all, it should be noted that our Rhodes scroll has Tagin on the Shatnez guts, which are, as you remember, the 7 letters already specified in the Talmud, Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Ein, Nun, Tzad, Shin. So, as you here can see, with the small strokes. Apart from these regular Tagin, the letters Beit, Dalet, Kuf, Het, Yud, Hei, Bedek, Chaya are marked with a single crown throughout the entire scroll, except the Yud. This is a writing custom often found in Sephardic scrolls. I have not found any Tagin in the entire scroll that exceed this set of letters, so the Shatnez guts and this Bedek Chaya. And this was a surprise to me, and I will tell you why in a moment. If you look at other Sephardic scrolls from the Middle Ages, this is a remarkable finding. Take, for example, the Parma manuscript 3295, which dates back to the 13th, 14th century. As we can see, all Shatnez guts are crowned with 3 short, fine strokes. The head always has a small tag. However, the manuscript also displays a great variety of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. What can be easily observed here is that the scribe wrote these special Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot directly while copying the text, whereas the regular Tagin were added later by another scribe. This could be a kind of master scribe who directly applied his knowledge of the correct placement, number and form of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, while a student perhaps then had to carry out the rather monotonous decoration with the rule-based Tagin. However, it may also be that the regular Tagin were added at a much later point of time. So I framed a very good example, so you can see this is probably made by the main scribe, and this was added later. So here you can also see the forms. This was written.
Is it Nun Sofit?
This is Nun Sofit.
Yeah.
This is a proof with the special Tagin made by the original scribe, and I think this level is added later. So but we don't know how much time lies between these two scribal works. A quite similar case can be observed in manuscript Parma 6001, a Torah Scroll consisting of sections written by different scribes. In the first and probably oldest parts, estimated to date from the 14th century, a scribe wrote the text including the Otiyyot Meshunnot, which were then supplemented by a later scribe with usual Tagin on the Shatnez guts, even some unusual Tagin on the Bedek Chaya, Beit Dalet Kuf Het Yud Hei. And the two hands can be easily distinguished, not only by the color of ink, but also by the shape of the Tagin, which the later hand has provided with small heads. And the same case, we cannot say how much time actually elapsed between these two scribal works. So these Tagin are made by the original scribe, and these are added at a later point of time. So all this like regular Tagin at a later, yes. Whereas this is for sure made by the original scribe. Another example of particular interest is a Sephardic scroll which was auctioned off to private ownership and was tested by carbon-14 analysis to date from the 13th century. Unfortunately, we do not have any images, but the expert Shlomo Zucker has described the manuscript in detail for Sotheby's. He reports a huge variance of Otiyyot Meshunnot, most of which were added to the original text layer based on the Sefer Tagin I already mentioned. What is exciting here is that a later hand deleted some of these irregular embellishments and added one tag on each of the letters B'dekreya, Beit, Dalet, Kuf, Chet, Yud, and 3 Tagin on the Shatnetzgatz. Apparently, this scroll was adapted by a scribe to later writing traditions. As a final example, I would like to present the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot of 2 Torah scrolls kept in the University Library of Bologna. First, of course, the famous Rotolodue, the oldest completely preserved Torah scroll, which has been dated by 2 independent C14 measurements between 1150 and 1225. Researchers believe that it originated in the area of Toulouse, in the region of Catalonia, which is now Provence. We see an early Sephardic script that does not contain any ordinary Tagin, neither on the Shatnetzgatz nor on the B'dekreya. What this scroll does contain in abundance, however, are unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. As you can see, the Tet, all this, with this many Tagin on special letters. In addition to this famous Torah scroll, the library also holds another Sephardic scroll, which has been dated to the 16th century, albeit without C14 analysis. In direct comparison to the Rhodes scroll, you can see that here too there are no unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, but only crowned Shatnetzgatz and B'dekreya, with the small stroke being placed on the left-hand side rather than on the center in the Bologna scroll. Yes, what happened? Wow, the Bima has a migraine or something. Oh no! Oh, that looks funny. New audio, new variations. if it's not moving, then it's okay. I would like to add with regard to Sepharad in the 12th and 15th century that the scribal literature from this period also suggests a frequent use of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. First and foremost, Maimonides, who, as already mentioned, exerted a considerable influence on Sephardic and subsequently Ashkenazi scribal culture with his remarks on writing the stam. So the so-called Sifrei Torah, Tfilin, and Mezuzot. I don't like this, but yeah, okay. In his Mishnah Torah, we read, one must take special care with the enlarged letters, the miniaturized letters, the letters with dots over them, and the unusual shaped letters, such as the bent over P's, the crooked letters, as the scribes have copied one from the other. One must also take care with the crowns on the letters and their number. Some crowned letters have 1, others have as many as 7. Maimonides does not refer to the unusual Tagin and Otiyyot and special letters forms as something special, but as a common writing practice. The same applies to Menachem ben Solomon Meiri, who was active in Perpignan in the second half of the 13th century, which was still under Spanish rule at this time. In his manual Kiryat Sefer, he summarized the rules for writing a Torah Scroll. In the foreword, he complained about the large number of different opinions regarding the ideal typeface of a Torah Scroll. A certain wild growth in letters, form and decoration was a particular thorn in the scholar's side, so he decided to explain the correct execution of the varied letters decoration in a separate section in an own chapter. He speaks of malformed one, Tsurara, wrapped, lefofot, curved, akumot, crowned, menutzarot, rounded, meugalot, extended, diftiot, pushed away, dechuyot, suspended, teluyot, and so on letters, and explains their appearance. Here we get a tangible idea of the richness of forms in this time. Meiri does not write about a few oddities of Jewish writing practice, but rather about an established tradition that, in terms of shapes, has clearly spiraled out of control. So now we come to this image. Furthermore, I would like to mention that 6 of the 12 textual witnesses of the Sefer Tagin, the Book of Crowns, are of Sephardic origin. They date from the 12th to the 15th century. The Sefer Tagin, as I mentioned already, is the most important source, or one of the most important sources. Of medieval scribes for the correct placement of these crowns and unusual letters. So let me emphasize at this point that the crowned Bedek Chaya, which dominate in our Rhodes scroll, are not mentioned in the Sefer Tagin, nor in any other Halakhic work or scribe's manual of the time. They also do not appear in Sephardic Bible codices. Usually, a Bible manuscript does not contain Tagin, Otiyyot, Meshunnot, but there, especially in this time from the 12th to the 15th century, are quite a large number of medieval manuscripts, Bible manuscripts. I've compiled about 100, nearly 100, and there are certainly more, that are decorated with these unusual letters as templates for Torah scribes. Fortunately, many of these manuscripts can be dated based on colophons and similar entries. I would like to show you, I don't know what happened. Yes, I would like to show you an example from Sepharad. This beautifully illuminated Bible manuscript with calendar calculation was written in Tudela in 1306. You can see the biblical text with the Masoretic commentary on the left, a little part of the Masoretic commentary, and and inserted by another hand with red ink, Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. Some P-Lephufim and Tet-Lephufim were already inserted by the original scribe, such as the wrapped Tet in Kitov, or the two Tagin on the Ayin, which has been given a curled, something like a curled tail. And also there is another two flags on the Lamed. But it was the scribe with the red ink who added hundreds upon hundreds of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, some of which he placed in the margin, probably to avoid impairing the legibility of the text. The red ink of the Tagin and other entries, such as the remark Hadam B'Tochot, is very similar to the red used in the holiday tables at the beginning of the manuscript. Not only for this reason do researchers believe that these entries were not written much later than the original text, probably in the 14th century. The scribes' enthusiasm for these smallest elements of writing was fueled by parallel exegetical tradition. In the introduction to his commentary on the Pentateuch, Moses ben Nachman, one of the most influential Sephardic scholars of the 13th century, speculates on the origins of the books of Moses and the circumstances surrounding their first written form. He teaches that Moses received a pre-existing Torah from God, which was burned with letters, I quote, of black fire and white fire. Here Moses appears as a kind of prototype of a scribe who, I quote, copies and writes like a sofer from a primordial Torah. In addition to the Torah, Moses was also initiated into the deep secrets of creation, which are inscribed in the shapes and decorations of the script. According to Nachmanides, a gifted exegete can trace the hidden essence of the divine by interpreting the clues inherent in the written characters, namely, I quote, the form of the letters, whether they have been altered in their form according to the law, or in their curves, halefufot, and bends, ha'akumot, in the thorns of the letters and their crowns. Begetreihen, ha'otiyyot, bekotze. The task of every scribe following in Moses' footsteps is to preserve the sacred text in exactly the same form and pass it on to the future generations so that these secrets are not lost. The fruitful relationship between mysticism and scribal tradition is evident in Nachmanides' much-quoted preface, and the mysticism of language in Spanish Kabbalah contains many scattered elements from scribal practice, and in turn had an influence on scribal literature from the 14th century onwards. But this is another story. The most famous exegete of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot is undoubtedly Jacob ben Asher. Jacob was born in Cologne around 1270, and he joined his father, the famous Asher ben Yachil Harosh, on his escape to Spain in the early 14th century. In his commentary on the Pentateuch, the smallest elements of the scripts, the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, feature prominently. The German-Spanish scholar interpreted the Tagin and specially written letters of hundreds of biblical passages. So I resist the temptation to give more examples, and would like to conclude by asking, is it likely that a Torah scroll from the Iberian Peninsula, perhaps 700 or even 800 years old, does not contain a single example of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot? We would be dealing with a scribe who, on the one hand, follows Maimonides' guidelines, but on the other, completely dispenses with unusual Tagin and letter forms, thus contradicting the impression given by the Halakhic regulations and scribal manuals of the region, which suggest a veritable heyday of this paleographic phenomenon. Nor was he enraptured or inspired by the growing wave of exegetical literature that interpreted the Tagin as a vehicle for a deeper knowledge of God and creation already in the early Middle Ages. Instead, we find the letters Beit Dalet Kuf Chet Yutei Bedek Chaya decorated with one tag each, a writing tradition that probably originating as a serif, but this is also another story. I will not go deeper into it. Did not manifest itself in the writing practice until later, perhaps from the 15th century onwards, and then from the 16th century onwards, completely replaced the unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. For this reason, in particular, I would place carefully the origin of the Rhodes Scroll in the early 16th century, as suggested by the second C14 analysis. In this case, the scroll would not have been written on the Iberian Peninsula, but by a Sephardic scribe in the Ottoman Empire or on Rhodes. One could speculate that the variability of the crowns and unusually written letters was gradually lost after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. As the knowledge of the correct placement in the Bible verses and words, the correct number of unusual Tagin, and the extravagant forms was no longer accessible due by the circumstances of life in a different cultural environment. The uncertain situation of the Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities after the traumatic expulsions throughout Europe and the encounter of different diaspora communities like Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Greek and Turkish may have reinforced the need for a uniform tradition, also with regard to the writing of a Torah Scroll. In fact, from the 16th century onwards, not only did the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot disappear, but exegetes and mystics also see keys to dwell upon them. So, the Torah Scroll from Rhodes seems to me to be an example of this trend. Thank you very much. So maybe we need a third measurement, C14 measurement, to find the right solution. Actually, yesterday I've seen this Torah Scroll in the museum, and so it was my impression that the Torah Scroll, which is here preserved in the museum, one of the older one, comes from not from the same scribe, but from the same time, because exactly the same phenomenon. You have the Tagin and Otiyyot on the Shatnez Getz and on the Bedek Chaya. You have this, so I think it's from the 16th century. And the Rhodes Scroll, I hope I did not destroy any legends or 800 years, but I don't, it's just, yeah. So, yeah.
First of all, thank you. Very fascinating. Yesterday at the museum, I also saw. I took a look at the Torah scrolls, and the first thing that was strange for me is that this is the Ashkenazi form of a Torah scroll. It's not this standing cassette which you normally would find in a Sephardic synagogue. So first of all, I'm just curious to know how this tradition of, I would call it Ashkenazi as I know it, Ashkenazi scrolls gotten to the Sephardic Rhodes.
Which one do you mean, which were preserved in the synagogue or in the museum?
Yes.
Ah, okay. I haven't seen this.
But this scroll too is, I would define it by its looks as an Ashkenazi scroll. Yes. Because this part,
not
okay. So
Mizrahim is more.
So this is a classical.
Okay, Sephardim from Spain.
So this is a script of an Ashkenazi classical 14th century Ashkenazi scroll, and it differs not only from the script, which is like more majestic, more. It's really a different script. You can distinguish very quickly between the script, Ashkenazi Sephardic script, and also the Leiten Parchment is also a sign. So
I was really talking only about the form. I thought that all Sephardic books, Rhodes, are in this, in this standing form of a cassette that you roll from. But apparently, this is
no.
I have some more questions if nobody.
Yeah, please.
Okay. One of the things that you showed was there was a writing. I think one of the Italian scrolls that has really you have black lines. Yes.
This one?
Yeah, the Bologna one. It really has black markings for for the writing, and you see that that this is called talui.
Yeah.
This is hanging. All the letters are hanging from the top of the line downwards. Is this a typical? Can you tell if it's talui or is it if it's omed? What time or what place it was written?
Not really. I don't think that there's any research of it, but what like scholars, manuscript researchers like Beit Arieh, Malachi Beit Arieh, they looked at it and said, okay, especially in Christian Europe, they letters sometimes were written on top of a line.
Omed, yeah.
Yes, Omed, and this Talui, it's more in the Sephardic, so this is the only thing, but it's also interesting.
And the Rhodes book, the Rhodes Scroll, which one?
See, it's also hanging.
It's talui.
Yeah, Talui. This is a Palma, Talui,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the Rhodes Scroll, Talui.
Yeah, it's talui.
And the Ashkenazi we will see at the end. You can't see it, so I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
This is probably both.
But you know what's here interesting? I did not go very deep into it. Here you can see in an Ashkenazi scroll from the 14th century that you have this Bedech Chaya, this Beit Dallendörfer and so. Here as small serifs. These are not like Tagin, real Tagins, like you can see like very strong and bold, but as very, very small Scribal, special things. So it's something different. And it would be interesting to see how it comes to be such a common way to embellish a Torah scroll. From the 16th century, or maybe it's influence from Ashkenazi coming into the Sephardic script, so it's we don't know much about it.
The Tarim of the letters are already in the Talmud. They are mentioned in the Talmud.
The 7, the Shatnetzgetz.
I know this story about when God gave the Torah to Moshe, he was writing all the Tarim, and Moshe asked him if he could already give it.
Yeah, maybe Dana later will give an impression of these stories.
Okay.
Yes. But also in the Sefer Tagin, so the foreword of the Sefer Tagin, they put this tradition of Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot very far in the past, almost very close to the Revelation. So just like always they try to push it in this, and also this is interpreted as part of the Revelation, and so. So, thank you very much. Achso, wie willst du es machen?
Eine Mail. Hast du eigentlich schon?
Also nicht den Abstand. Ja. Du bist ja im Zoom drin, weißt du, habe ich gedacht. Achso, ich habe auch einen Adapter. Wenn ich bräuchte, dann ist lustig, wenn ihr Zoom, falls er noch jemand da ist. Oh, jetzt hat sich mit dem Plan das ist durcheinander.
Oh. I'm not talking about the Victorine, it's not the yeah, but it was because I work in Ashkenaz. I was asking why are we also calling them Victorine, like Victorine? Like France with a scroll, and it doesn't look like a crown, so I went into this story quite deep, so yes.
Yeah,
so while they are still figuring out the significant stuff, by looking outside the window, I'm really glad we did this walk. We would have been like soaked. So our next speaker. Should we leave the window open, try a little bit air? So, okay. So we continue. I hope you still have strength, and I think we are still continuing. I don't know if we still continue for the another one. So our next speaker is another of my dear colleagues, May. She is one of our two PhD students. But I can tell you a little story about that actually she started as a student assistant in our project, but very soon we found out, no. We have to promote her and to push her a little bit to finish her studies to become like a PhD student. And because of German bureaucracy, again, she actually had to do a second master. She already received a master from Jerusalem, like Hebrew University, but because of the system, the German crazy system, she couldn't start a PhD immediately. So in a hurry, she did another master, also in Jewish studies. So she became our PhD student, and the second master in Berlin was actually about the subject that she's now also continuing to work on. It's another Scribal manual called Baruch Shama. And today she's talking about, based on this actually treatise text from the Middle Ages, about the making of parchment. So, and also, although she's still on a rather early stage of her academic career, which is difficult in itself because of the system again, but she already published here and there in the course of our project. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good. So the title is Did Jewish Scribes in Medieval Ashkenaz Make Their Own Parchment? So in the title you already see it's going to be mainly about Ashkenaz, but I'm going to make two connections, one directly to Rhodes and one generally to Greece or to the Greek language, just to make it more relevant to you guys. And then it's just because of the nature of the Scribal handbook that I work on, and you will see in a second what I mean. I will just briefly give you some context about the manuscript or the text I'm dealing with. So basically it's a handbook that deals with the production and writing of tefillin. Here you see a modern image of one, and I guess most of you know what they look like. But you also see that the second part of the handbook is about the writing of the letters and the Otiyyot Meshunnot that we just heard about. So that's the second big part, and then the third one is just about also something we heard about now, like scribal conventions with regards to Shirat Hayam, or like the opened and closed sections in the Torah. And so about my manuscripts, they are mainly, as you can see in the script type, almost all of them are Ashkenazi. From the script type, we have one Italian, this one, and the first one I marked in red, that's the oldest one we have from the Vatican State Library. Yes, and what I'm kind of doing is like and geographically, it's also interesting that the manuscript was copied in many places, so ranging from the place of Italy until the east, even in Ukraine. So it's covering a broad spectrum in terms of time and space that this manual was popular. Yep. The manuscript comes in many shapes and sizes. That's the Italian one. And these are just ideas to give you ideas what they look like. We also have prints. The earliest is from 1798. And this one is the Warsaw print. And we have a modern edition by an Israeli from 1970. But the problem with this one is that he doesn't, for example, include the manuscript images of the letters. And he has really made like an eclectic edition. That means he left out many manuscript witnesses that differed considerably from what he thought was the main text. Just to briefly show you, this is what an edition looks like in our project. This is like a lot of it looks like code, but it's actually quite easier for humanities scholars like us. And this is what it's supposed to look like later on when we have, where we can actually display it for you guys to work on. And just briefly some context about the nature of the text. So when I'm going to talk about my manual, I'll refer to two rabbis that wrote the text. So we have, on the one hand, we have the base text by Abraham, which is referred to as Tikkun Tefillin. And then we have a second rabbi who commented on it. So don't get confused when I sometimes say Avraham and sometimes Shimshon or Samson. And the form of the commentary is also often in marginalia. And that makes it difficult also for people like me who edit the text to differentiate exactly, okay, what did the scribe add, or like the scribe who copied the manuscript, or what was the original author, Rabbi Samson. Like this one, for example. That could just be a scribal note. And then geographically, just something briefly about the rabbis. We have Avraham, who was kind of located in Sinsheim, and he was also mentioned as a chazan in Erfurt around 1330, but I think he probably wrote his manual about tefillin making a bit earlier, because the earliest scribal manual is from 1383, like completed with commentary, so it must have been written at the end of the 13th or at the beginning of the 14th century. And Samson himself comes from Saxony, there he was born, and then when he was 8 years old, his family went to Prague, where all his parents and his siblings died, and he became an orphan, and at the same time an apprentice with the scribe Issachar, and there he learned his skills of writing tefillin. And that's also where he got the manual, Tikkun Tefillin, by Abraham, and that's when he commented on it, because like he learned with it, and then he thought, oh, okay, but a lot of information is missing, I'm going to add to it. And then, interestingly, he describes a lot of places he's been to where he has looked at tefillin and communities, and where they make tefillin as well. So one is Vienna. We have also the land of Bayern, Bavaria, Erfurt, obviously, and then a place in modern-day Germany, Poland, Lusatia or Lausitz. Okay, and now we are ready to begin with our question. Did scribes actually make their own parchment? And it's interesting that actually the consensus in the scholarly world is that in Ashkenaz, they did not make their own parchment. Whereas with regards to Italy, like Spain, like medieval Italy and Spain, people like generally accept, Jews made their own parchment. And before we dig deeper into it, I also want to ask a question. Actually, what happened in the 12th and 13th centuries, and did people wear tefillin? Because many scholars like Elisha Baumgarten, Yehuda Galinsky, they looked into this question. They actually said people didn't wear tefillin back then. First of all, because it wasn't like socially accepted, it wasn't like a thing people would do. And then on the other hand, also it was expensive to buy them. And it was just not, it's not something that the sources tell us that people did. And we have actually this record of, I'm just needing exactly, Moses ben Yaakov of Kusi in 1236. He went about Spain, but also France and Germany. And apparently he was preaching about this, like to people, that they should actually implement the commandments of wearing tefillin and also having mezuzot in the house, because he said that's important. And apparently he persuaded a lot of people to become more religious in that sense. Another thing that happens, or that we see, is like an increase of Halakhic manuals in Minhagim books. So Minhagim books are for example, also like books that tell people what to eat, like what food is kosher, what is not. For Chazan, maybe it would be a manual containing like instructions for him. There are many, many different types, and we see an influx in that in the 13th century. People have attributed that to the gradual spread of Jews across the Germanic lands. First of all, because of the economic opportunities, but also because of increased persecution. As builders and tailors, that just doesn't exist or is not known of. Jews had never had a hand in this profession. And there, I just want to make an excursion to Rhodes, because we actually travel documents or travel itinerary stories. One from Benjamin of Tudela and one of by this Obadiah from 1487, and he actually says very beautifully, like he's really thrilled by the Jews on Rhodes, and he says, without exception, they are intelligent, well-spoken, ethical, cultured, and well-mannered. Even the tannery workers among them wear clean clothing and speak pleasantly. Their hair is well-styled, and they are as handsome as princes. And also the women are beautiful, and they're also engaged in crafts, so it's very cool that we have this source. And that's one of the reasons why scholars don't question like the existence of tannery workers in Rhodes, but then also we have similar examples for Spain and for Italy. And generally, if we look at the Talmud, the profession of a tanner wasn't something that is very admirable or like sought after, and actually many passages it's not spoken well of. And woe to him whose profession is that of a tanner, for example. Just because it was smelly, you had to, like, it was just not a nice business working with animal hides that, that start to smell, and especially in hot areas. And these are images, just for you to get an idea, in case you haven't seen the parchment making process. And we're dealing with like an animal skin here, like you can see that reflected in the books that we look at. Yeah. And now we're getting to my manual, because so a few things are special about it. First of all, we have 11 folios that deal with parchment making, which is quite a lot if we compare that to other sources from like Latin, Christian accounts. That's like something unheard of that we don't have otherwise, not to that extent. Because, for example, we have this one from the 11th or 12th century, I think. Like very short descriptions and very academic, not very practical. And we're not going to read this because we don't have time. Then we have, for example, like a riddle, about parchment making. This is the longest account we have in Latin about an Italian, or like in Bologna, parchment making in Bologna. And that's maybe like the most practical account we have. And generally what we can say is that these accounts were written from a person standing behind the craftsperson, and observing that from a position of academic or social superiority, like I am doing now. Like, I have no idea how to practically make parchment. I only know the theory. And in the manual instead, we see they have they have insights into practical matters, like how long a skin should be soaked in water. Like they can tell from the level of dryness. They know it by the thickness of the skin. And they have like little tips like, mark your skin before you process it, so you remember which one was the hairy side, which the fleshy side, in case you can't differentiate it anymore afterwards. And then also statements like, this is how I personally do it. A quick excursion to the Talmudic tanning of skin. skins because they differ a little bit of how it was later then made in Europe. And we basically have 4 steps, really, really simplified. We put the skin in salt water, let it soak. Then in like a mixture, like a solution of flour that has been fermented. Then in a tanning solution, which was, like in the Talmud, is referred to be'afatzim, so like with walnut. And then usually you would dry them. We have also accounts where dog dung is used to improve the skins, but for holy scrolls, there was other question. And then translated that into into parchment for Torah scrolls, we have 3 different types, which are traditionally defined like this, but there are also other ways to define them. So there's like a controversy about it, but this is the standard way, I would say. And there we say that we see that the Gvil is usually for the Torah, like we saw with the Sephardi scrolls. Then Klav for Tefillin, and Dursustus for the Mezuzah. And then there are 3 types of skins that are unfit for writing a Torah on, and those are not allowed to be used. And then interestingly, this art of splitting a skin into 2 halves, that apparently wasn't known in Europe at all. So that seemed to have been like a thing they did in Babylon, but then that kind of got lost. So we have, for example, Chai Gaon, he saw it, and he reports it in a responsa, but in medieval Germany, that was something the artist didn't know. And then if we look at the if we make a little excursion to because in Europe, if we go back, in Europe, what they would do instead of the be'afatzim, like with the afatzim, the walnut, they would put it into a lime solution. And that then was a controversy in terms of, okay, can we actually do it because it's not the Talmudic method? And then in the Arabic lands, they had a similar change, because there they had a mixture of using the Talmudic process, like they salted it or put it in a salt solution, and then they used lime as well. And that was already a controversy back then with the Geonim. And they kind of reached the conclusion that it was okay. That was before it even became a debate in Europe. And now the second excursion with to Greece or Greek language is when we look at the terminology used in Baruch Shama, because here and then it incorporates German words into the text. So, for example, when it comes to the hairy side of the skin, they say, or B'lishon Ashkenaz, it's called nerve or nerve. And I found that in the dictionary for Old German. And it's kind of the definition given as is the hairy side of a tanned hide. And then interestingly, in 2 other manuscripts of Baruch Shama, they give a term, B'lishon Ivan, tzipa. And there I kind of want to ask the Greek speakers here if they know this term, because I found tzipa like this in a dictionary as an alternative word for derma, like we all know dermatology, but I don't know if tzipa is used at all, and I would be interested to hear. It is a Greek word, yeah. And do you refer to human skin like this, or is it does it have a connotation
If somebody cannot trust him, or we say he doesn't have children, it means it's not ashamed of what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that means the skin.
Okay.
Changes the skin.
Like he doesn't have thick enough skin to be strong enough.
Or he has, to be trusted or to be.
Okay. Yeah, that's
It
interesting.
is not a saying of what he is doing.
Mm-hmm.
We use the word tzipa.
Okay. Yeah, interesting.
But it's something that it covers, like also when you boil the milk, on the top it comes on we call it also tzipa of the.
Okay, then it would fit, kind of, because the hairy side would be the outer layer of the skin, right? The crust, yeah? Okay. Pellen? Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially it's interesting because the manuscripts do not show any connection to anything Greek. So I don't know how Greek words came into that or why the scribe thought it was interesting to know that in Greece, or I don't know, in the Greek language, they refer to this term like this. But maybe I'll find more information. We'll see. So then the statement that because in Europe the parchment was made with lime and was kind of the pergament that people used. There's this Menachem Haran said, well, the Jews then adopted it without any hesitation, that this was the accepted equivalent to the Talmudic way of doing parchment. And Annett basically refuted that and by showing the Halakhic discussions about this and said, well, they didn't accept this without hesitation, but actually it was a big Halakhic debate, which I'm not going to display here because that would we don't have time for that. So we can rule that out, and instead, what we see in the Halakhic or in the manual, handbook literature, is that there's an emphasis on processing them lishma, so for a certain purpose or like with a dedication in mind. So then in Baruch Shama we have the phrasing. So when you put them in water, like the hides, you should say, for the holy Torah of Israel, for the sake of Tefillin and Mezuzot and Kemain, I put these hides in water. And it's very important to say this out loud. And this goes back to a Talmudic practice or a Talmudic debate about whether, that they have to be, like the Rashbag said, they have to be processed lishma. And there's also a debate about it, but it will go beyond the scope. And exactly. So, and basically, it's because of Rabbeinu Tam from the 12th century who kind of made this acceptable within Europe. And he's also quoted in the manual. Exactly. And there's an example of Düringen, from Thüringen, where apparently the Jews didn't make it like this and didn't process skins correctly. So I always like these little snippets because that's where the manual becomes a historical witness and tells us about practices or perhaps malpractices. So we've established this is not correct, and the whole handling of putting skins into water and saying something about it, like dedicating them. This we also see reflected in guilds. So apparently, when there was the master of the guild, he would remain or hold the privilege of putting the skins into water, like starting the process, and then all the skins made in that guild were considered made by him. And so perhaps this is also something we find in the non-Jewish environment, that they then picked up on, okay, if the Jew puts the skins in the water, then basically the parchment was made by Jews, even if perhaps a non-Jew continued the parchment process. That is because the one argument is often that Jews were excluded from guild membership. But we actually have a very important source from Esslingen in 1331, where there's the old German, then the kind of modern German that I put, and an English translation, where Jewish people are admitted to the guild, like they can buy themselves into the guild and they can remain Jewish. So they don't have to, because guilds were often connected to very Christian rites, so you would go to Mass together, you'd have to be baptized. But this source actually states that you can remain Jewish and live as a Jew in all respects if you choose to join the guild. So this the stereotype that Jews were radically excluded from guild membership is not quite true. And actually, I found many sources from parchment making or for Jewish parchment making in these areas. However, they're all a bit later, so they're all 14th, 15th century. So we don't have anything earlier than that. Those are examples. Okay, maybe we skip this. Or just really quickly. So why is it so difficult to find evidence for Jewish craftsmen or parchment makers? One reason could be, so Michael Toch has made this amazing study about Nuremberg, and there's a census, and he has listed all the different professions and how many people were in it. And we see that out of the 76 male Jews that were counted, 11 were craftsmen, so about 14%. But the thing is, he could actually locate every single person from the census in the houses in Nuremberg, except for the craftsmen. He couldn't figure out where they lived. So perhaps they lived outside the city, which makes sense for tanners, especially because they had to be near a river. They would produce smelly, smelly, whatever, products. And then also the thing is that Asaf said that yesterday very correctly, that many people had often one person would hold 3 different professions in a given community. So we have an account where one guy is he's a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, and an innkeeper, and then a third thing at the same time. Maybe Chazan. Is that the Chazan? Yeah. Okay. So I think, and also perhaps these craftsmen actually escaped the census in the sense that maybe they were excluded from paying taxes because they were kind of part of the Jewish community, but not subjected to fees, especially if they lived outside the city. And one example, for example, he gives is mikvaot. So we have many mikvahs in many places, but on only 3 accounts we have people that actually tended to the mikvaot, like staff for the bath. But does that then make us conclude, okay, we have mikvaot in all those places, but there were no people tending to them? And I think that's probably a wrong conclusion, because we probably had them, we just don't have records of them. Yeah, okay, we can skip this. This as well. This as well. And I just want to finish with an example of where Jews and Gentiles make parchment together in the Scribal manual. And not this one, sorry. Here. So because the manual deals with all parts of making tefillin, so there's also one part where it is about making parchment black for the tefillin cases. And he says, okay, well, the best way for the Jew is to do this, to make the dye, the blackening liquid inside the Jewish home. But if he doesn't have the material, he can also go and get the ingredients from a Jewish, from a non-Jewish craftsman. And in general, what Rabbi Abraham says, the Jewish worker himself, he must dye the skin black. But Samson doesn't have, that's the gloss 16, he doesn't actually have a problem with the Gentile also making the skin black, because he says, touching the skin or handling it doesn't diminish the holiness of the hide at all. And that's actually quite contrary to what scholarship has so far thought about parchment making, that there was this huge divide between Jews and Christians, and here we see actually it wasn't that much of a big deal. Yeah. So I couldn't find that many historic sources for parchment making in medieval Ashkenaz, but or not as many as I thought I would, to refute this standard in scholarship that there weren't any. But I think we're in a good way to kind of break up the stereotypes and show that there were exceptions, that there are other ways of looking at this. And a big part plays the Scribal manual I'm working on, I think, because it shows that there were indeed Jews making parchment. And and the principal aim, or like one of the big principles, wasn't a separation per se between Jews and Christians making parchment, but actually there was a working together, and Jews were perhaps even admitted to guilds, and Jews perhaps also employed Gentiles working in their houses, in Jewish houses, making parchment with them. Yep. So thank you so much. So, are there questions?
It occurs to me that it's very reasonable to think that the Jews were in charge, and why not the Sofrim, in preparing the parchment because of the kosher slaughtering. I mean, if you go to the origin, probably they would take mainly cow leather from the cows that they had slaughtered in their own hands. So why is it even a question? I wonder. I just wonder why is it even a question if the Jews or the Sofrim had prepared their own cloth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because so parchment has to be made from a kosher animal, like a kosher land animal. And it's true, it doesn't even have to be slaughtered. It could also be
Nebela.
Exactly, like nowadays equivalent would be like roadkill. If you hit a deer with a car, you can still make parchment from it. You're not allowed to eat it, but you can make parchment. And so, exactly, you could also get Gentile meat, basically, or like the skins of animals slaughtered by Gentiles. And I think the scholarship has. I haven't been able to go really much into the Sefer Hasidim, but those texts give like a very secluded image of they make a lot of panic in terms of Jews, don't let the Gelach, like the monk, touch your books, and they also elevated, so not just a Torah scroll, but they also elevated the oral Torah, so that anything like Mishnaic or Talmudic written on parchment was elevated onto a holiness level. And they were really like warning Jews not to engage with Christians or let them touch their books. And I think scholarship has only focused so far on those texts, or mainly, and got an idea that somehow they were very separated. And I think because of the lack of sources, that's why. Yeah. But you can ask, yeah.
You could ask the other way around. Why is it such a big issue in the rabbinic literature in this time? All this parchment thing. So maybe, I don't know, what was...
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. That's where you have also written a lot on the status, right, of the scrolls and levels of holiness and ideas of or conceptions of holiness.
So for me, because it's so many treatises on this subjects in all kinds of rabbinic literature and scribal manuals, that I had got the feeling, so maybe they excluded from some word while they talking about if it would be, if it was normal to prepare your own parchment, maybe they would not write about it the entire time. So it's could be the other way around. Yeah. I don't think it was like a normal thing to prepare your own parchment in this time. Also because it's a dirty, it's really a work, to and
two questions or one question. What is the argument or the arguments of Elisheva Baumgarten that she said that tefillin were not wear in this time from the 13th and 14th century only?
Well, she says that it wasn't a it wasn't first of all it wasn't community consensus that it was super important, and then she says material costs, like it was just, and in the Scribal manual here you also see the Samson says people don't have Meshunnot on their houses, and when they buy tefillin all they care about is that they're cheap and they don't look at quality, so it does seem to have been but I don't think she goes really into depth with that question. She just picks up on a few.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I have only two microphones. Two legs.
Thank you, and thank you so much. It's such an interesting area to think about. But I'm wondering, because there was a schism somewhere in the greater community in terms of craft guilds, and so maybe this was a part of the image we have of this being a big problem, because the Jews were asked to pay to be admitted to the guild of the tanners, and this already makes it a larger decision, a more difficult decision for a Jew to become a member, and also the awareness of his fellow workers that he's different. And so on a human community level, this is also to me a divisive thing.
Yeah, that's a comment, right? Not a question so much, or is it? Is there a question I'm hearing or not? Because I think it's very helpful comment. Yeah.
It's more of a comment,
exactly.
But it could be why we perceive this as a problem. The making of the parchment yourself, or the dyeing of the black,
Like you mean it's more cost effective for the community if they have their own professional doing.
Yes. Yeah. And then you would be personally, or your children going to school, or you would be looked upon differently. So there is maybe it's a bigger deal than we're perceiving from the scholarship.
Yeah, and I also think it depends a lot on the size of a community. I think if there's a considerably sized Jewish community, I personally think it very highly unlikely that they didn't have their own scribes who made their own parchment. I don't know, just from a practical point, as you said, it's just, I think that because of the lack of sources, that there has been this certain stereotype in scholarship, and I think we need to break it apart through debates like this, a little bit. And I think another reason why Jews should make their own parchment was this rise in the Tosafist movement of going back, to the Talmud and really interpreting it in a new way and putting an emphasis on religious practice. Because Samson, for example, he wanted to make sure that people wear tefillin, that what he was more interested in even was that they were wearing the right ones, or like correctly processed, correctly produced ones. And for that, if the parchment is not produced lishma, then it's not a holy device, like a holy item. Then praying with it doesn't make sense. So I think from that point of view, it's very important that we control the process and how it's made. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for this presentation. I just want to add something to your argument, because I think what we very often see in I can only really speak about later Halakhic sources, but in the Shulchan Aruch and the commentaries, right, there's so much focus on this relationship between Jews and non-Jews in the parchment making, because there are many details surrounding it, right? Many considerations. When does a Jew need to be present? and what does he need to say? Does he need to say it out loud? What if he forgets about it? What if he is kind of nervous about saying it in front of the non-Jew? And so I think, at least in the later Halakhic text, this notion of, okay, non-Jews now also part of this process, negotiating this in connection with considerations of lishma, makes up such a takes up such a big space, which might skew a bit our perception that, in many cases, what they are discussing in detail about non-Jewish participation in Parchment, that might have been, only an exception, or something that's not necessarily so common, because again, very often Jewish law focuses on these kind of defined borderline cases. But I think when we look at the broader historical developments that I've seen in my manuals from the 19th century, that definitely there was a move towards more involvement of non-Jewish tanners. For example, in one manual, there's a particular Jewish tanner is highlighted and quoted, but he's also described as one of the few scribes who are involved in the tanning industry. So I think there must have been a slow development, but it could be that this development towards non-Jewish tanners was not as early as the consensus says, and you're giving quite a lot of evidence that that move might have been a bit later.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I can just briefly add for one minute, that's interesting because I also saw that, for example, with Hameiri in Perpignan, he says many people rule the Mahmir decision, basically that that the Jew should do the whole thing and no non-Jew should be involved. But then that was not realistic, because if the place didn't have, then maybe we needed some non-Jewish involvement. And equally, I found a response from Yemen, where Rabbi said, well, there shouldn't be, this is for a case where there are no Jewish tanners around, but because here in Yemen we have enough Jewish tanners, a Gentile should not be involved. So, and even though that was from the 18th century, I feel like that reflects perhaps the kind of spirit behind it, that really it was for exceptional cases, and the best way of fulfilling the mitzvah is really if the Jew does it by himself. Super. Thank you.
So, do you have enough strength or a little bit strength left after a short break to have to hear our last
10 minutes to
What about the concerts?
10 minutes
at 6? At 6? Oh no, yeah, but we have two more speakers left. So it's supposed to be here. Yes. So maybe we could shift the concept a little bit later. So then we have 10 minutes of break.
because we have an appointment for you.
And which time?
7:30.
Oh. So
Lecture for tomorrow.
yes. Or maybe one lecture now, or one tomorrow.
One tomorrow.
Yeah, I think so.
Then you drive for tomorrow. 3 tomorrow.
So we make 10 minutes coffee break, and then Katharina
Tiene en la página. Entras a Heritage y lo ves. Heritage, ¿no? May Heritage. ¿Cómo? No. Encuentro el apellido eso te define, ¿no? Sí. El abuelo fantasma se quiere claro, vos Tarija. Mi abuelo habita en Buenos Aires, el barrio de Katharina es Capeluto, nace en Buenos Aires. Sí. Ellos dos, no en Buenos Aires. Capeluto, mi bisabuela y la ¿sí? Los padres de mi abuelo David el lado acá, claro, pero como nosotros vimos para Shalom, se conocieron ahí. El lado de mamá, todo. Todo el que se trica, no trica, mi abuela María María Javier, padre de Javier de madre Chami. Chami, que trajeron a todos. Chami era casado de ella, era lo que pagaban la vez. Chami, algo Chami, muy Chami. Notrica con el Jade y Notrica es de padre Notrica, de madre Soriano. ¿Sí? Y ahí viene Soriano y Al-Jaleb y Chami. My mother, okay. I could be possible. I have 8 years old. 9 years old. I was 8 years old because I was born in 1960. 1969. So that was 1977. Okay. Maybe. Why not? And you don't have to very, very young. Okay. I was my grandfather walking around. Yes, I no, by long, no. They used to sleep there with bright water. So there was a big, I don't know, it was like a in the middle of where the water poured out when it rained. Okay? It was the same. My grandmother took the washer I saw it. And I told you that one. Came again with and then it was a big thing. And I told you in 3 minutes. First or the second? The first or the second local shop was my grandfather's shop. And we don't remember if it was the first or the second in the right. I showed you your book. And he says that he is there for and I was seeing and I read my grandmother. No, Maria Carlos. See tomorrow, this house is my grandfather's house. Inside the house because they ready. In that corner was the bed, and in the middle was the bed. Padre, yo vine al centro y conmigo. ¿Entiendes? Claro. This is my grandmother, and this is my aunt. Yes, this is my grandmother. Send me the photo, please. Yeah, I know. Yes, I have the calendar, and in the calendar there is one person we employ. Sammy. This is Sammy. Abner Rodriguez Madino. He's the father of Sammy. ¿Qué pasa con los hijos? Maybe that could be the first photo from Sammy. Maybe I want to show you the last photo. Now we can see the photo. This is Xavier. No, this is Victor. No, this is this is my grandma. This is Abner. Abner Musica. And this is Sammy. I don't think, maybe Sammy, maybe Victor Fabiano. Victor Fabiano. Maybe it could be. Because the face is Victor, it's okay. This is the ship. Yes, we know that's what of course. You know it's that one. And me, yeah, everybody's coming in the street. Yes, so. Tu abuela, bueno, siempre familia, aparecía casada con mayor. Mandó viejo amigo. My grandfather and my grandfather. This is my house. I don't agree to this is my house. 60 years old. When she had the baby, she cried and she molested and she said, I want it. So when I came to Argentina, when I went to the house name, I But my grandfather changed the name of the old owner when he bought it. So it was a son house and not Notarica's house. And 2 months later, they were a Notarica's house daughter here. And she entered the reform of the house. She saw the end and it was a store. Okay? So I want to see where is she asked that because she started crying inside the house and the new she said, "Why are you crying?" Because this is my grandfather's house. We know that a few months ago, a few months before that, my mother pasa con los hijos because she is sultana. Okay? She has sultanas oriental. This is my grandmother. She's 75 Código, pero es my grandfather never. Okay. I didn't know also. You didn't know what is she? Sultana. María Jadez, Náutica. And Sami. No, no much. Mary, okay, I never did it. You never have been very generous. It's totally it's totally as they have everything okay, but one time I've never married. I don't want to take two because they're not enough. And that is I've had 1, 2, 3 brothers. The big one, okay. When she was 10, 12. She was 5 or 4, and he was in her mother. Okay, and the mother is the father that I show you. Their father died, but in Brooklyn, a relative and ship a ticket to go to make the
Hello, we are going to continue. I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you guys can take a seat, please. Soll ich einfach anfangen zu reden? Achso. Ist es Carmen, ne? Ist es Carmen? Carmen ist das, ne? Da hinten, oder? Ja. Carmen! Wir continuing. Es ist manchmal gut, einfach den Namen zu sagen. Okay, we are going to continue with our last session for today. And I have the great privilege to introduce my colleague and fellow PhD student in the project, Katharina Wendl. For more than 3 years now, she has been working on her PhD project, the 19th century Scribal handbook Kesset HaSofer, written by Shlomo Gansfried, a Hungarian Rabbi. She holds a BA and an MA in Jewish Studies and Teacher Education from the University of Vienna, as well as a second master's in Jewish Education from the London School of Jewish Studies in Middlesex University. And when you Google Katharina, you'll find many of her interests, academic interests and projects, including something about her time in the Holocaust Museum Yad Vashem in Israel, like book reviews she has written, and translations she has made of Talmudic tractates.
Actually, I did not make these translations.
But you edited them.
Involved in the editing of
yes,
them.
Sorry, you edited them. And most of them relevant like to Halakhic issues related to women, right?
Yeah.
But what you can't find on Google is the invaluable asset she has been to our team. She's really someone who gets stuff done. She's incredibly diligent. And she's our Halakhic expert. So if I have a question, there's a 99% chance that Katharina has read about it, and I always come to her. So please welcome Katharina now.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to start this presentation about Sepharad in Ashkenazi scrolls with a quote from a Scribal handbook. I'm going to read it in English. You can follow here. And it says that it's not in the main text, but it's in footnotes. This is how Maimonides and the rest of the Halakhic deciders rule. And I'm surprised why scribes do not do so nowadays with this kind of ink. So I myself tried out this ink, and I made it, and it was a very beautiful ink. And with it, I'm writing my Torah scroll. May God grant me the merit to finish and complete it. In this excerpt from Kesset HaSofer, a 19th century Ashkenazi Scribal manual, the author, Shlomo Gansfried, chooses to rely on medieval Sephardi authorities over a long-established, locally accepted practice of how to make ink. This is a bit puzzling, Why should an Ashkenazi scribe in the 19th century, who has access to the inks that all the other scribes are using, why should he rely on a medieval alternative Halakhic opinion about making ink when the established custom in this area is otherwise? While Halakhic authorities, most prominently Sephardi ones like Maimonides, advocate for carbon-based inks, the scribal custom in this area in Central Europe, Eastern Hungary, used iron-based inks. So carbon-based inks are ones made out of the ashes of vegetables, for example, on charcoal, whereas iron-based inks is made from iron sulfates, which can be found, for example, in gallnuts. Seeking to adhere to the Halakhic traditions passed down by Sephardi rabbis, not the less than ideal customs of the scribes of his area and time, Rabbi Gansfried notes that he resolved to write this Torah scroll with with carbon-based ink endorsed by the medieval Sephardi Halakhic authorities, and he's quite happy with the result. What does this little note in a Scribal manual tell us about Scribal authority, about law and practice in the modern period? In this presentation, I hope to dwell on this question, and throughout my talk, I hope to also illustrate the legacy and importance and the role of Sephardic psak, Sephardic Halakhic rulings and legislation in Ashkenazi Scribal manuals. I will foreground the dynamics of cultural and legal exchange, and in Keser Sofer, we really can see that Sephardi Halakhic texts, especially codes and responsa, functioned as a practical archive of scribal expertise that Ashkenazi scribes and rabbis increasingly tapped into and relied on in a period of modernization and changes in standardization. So over the centuries, and I think we've seen that in many different contexts, scribal practice was influenced by different cultural contexts, by technological developments and epistemological changes of what's important and what's not so important. As Scribal literature developed, the genre of Scribal manuals also emerged, and these manuals are practical handbooks, like the ones Annett talked about, Baruch Shammar. They merge clear practical instructions with insights into the Halakhic background and deliberations surrounding Scribal practices. Scribal skill and knowledge, however, have been and continue to be largely transmitted from one scribe to the other, informed by localized traditions concerning letter shapes, repair proceedings, and other practices. But at the same time, scribes also interact within a Halakhic framework that spans, that really transcends Jewish communities and is not local but really global. And so Halakha and Minhag, law and custom, they don't always go together, as we've seen in this example of the inks. And in fact, this is a tension that really transcends the scribe's parchment and also impacts Jewish law and practice on a wider scale. This entanglement of law and practice is dynamic and flexible, ever-changing, but some trends can be made out. Researchers and historians like Soloveitchik, Friedman, and Bloch have pointed out that over time, and particularly in the modern period, which is what I'm studying, the importance of textual authority of law, exercised primarily by rabbinic scholars, grew considerably. Rabbis and lay people, and also ritual professionals like slaughterers or scribes, increasingly relied on written manuals and codes, and less on mimetic traditions, which are those that are learned by copying or imitating to understand how Judaism should be practiced. And this caused tensions and contradictions, and also problem with scribal law and traditions to surface, with rabbis and scribes having competing wishes. While and as we've seen in Annett's talk, while rabbis strove for uniformity and standardization when it comes to Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, like these ones, that scribes wanted to express were more creative than the rabbis were happy with. And we see divergences in the practical solutions developed by scribes to fix torn parchment that rabbis were not happy with because they have more complex workarounds. And there are also tensions between following the letter of the law and tapping into aesthetics, wanting to improve the visual presentation of a Torah scroll, which might go beyond the Halakhic parameters that have been established. So to show how Sephardi Halakhic texts, especially responsa, function as an archive of Scribal expertise in the modern period and helped mediate tensions between law and custom that were discussed in 19th century Ashkenaz, I will look at a text I researched, which is Kesser HaSofer. It's one of the most significant and impactful Ashkenazi Scribal manuals in the 19th century. And in this talk, I want to explore how its author discussed opinions by rabbinic authorities with a Sephardic heritage, showing how Sephardi traditions and legislation have influenced the Halakhic reasoning and decision-making in this manual. Now, what's to gain from this? We have studies on medieval Scribal culture that show that Maimonides' rendering of Scribal law in particular was very influential in Ashkenaz, in manuals and also in practice. However, the modern iteration of this transfer of Halakhic knowledge from Sepharad to Ashkenaz has not been the focus of research so much. There is some research on Jewish Orientalism, the fascination and adoption of Sephardi culture and tradition by European Jews, which has shown how Ashkenazi Jews have adopted Sephardi philosophy, thought, and also very much concretely architectural features of synagogues in the 19th century. But there has not been so much research into the adoption of Sephardic halakha, of the legal halachic aspect in that century, and that's where I hope my little excursion falls into. There are studies, however, about the transfer from Ashkenaz to Sepharad in terms of halakha, legal thinking. Tzvi Zohar has written a very interesting book about this, and but then again, I'm going into the opposite direction, looking at how Sepharad was transferred into Ashkenazi manuals. A brief note about Kesser HaSofer as a manual. If I can move to the next slide. Yes. So Kesser HaSofer is a manual written by Shlomo Ganzfried, we have it here, in 1835. And it became quickly influential in Scribal culture, but it does not simply transmit law, but actively selects which past voices count as authoritative. Its main text is often very, very practical, straightforward paraphrase of the Shulchan Aruch, the 16th century Halakhic code, which very quickly became an authoritative, widely accepted code of Jewish law. But in the footnotes, which is also the ones I quoted from earlier, are much more involved. They discuss intricacies of Scribal practice, drawing on Scribal, on the wealth of rabbinic literature, both ancient and contemporary, to clarify the background, the reasoning, and the implications of Jewish laws and traditions. Inevitably, Ganzfried has to often significantly narrow down complex discussions of Safrut to make them accessible to beginner scribes who, might have just tried out once how to write a letter and thought, oh, that's quite enjoyable, right? Thus, the choices he makes in which sources he uses and how he presents them are quite critical and need to be investigated carefully. And this is where his authorial agency lies, in the collating and arranging of the sources, even if many parts of his texts are basically just copy-paste from other sources. But the question is, where does he quote them from? Where does he use them from? So in this regard, I think that his frequent reliance and quoting of Sephardi Halakhic authority is striking and a constant feature of his work, and I'm going to have a look at some examples. You won't be surprised, but Kesser HaSofer extensively references and quotes the Shulchan Aruch. At the beginning of the 19th century, this code of law had already developed into really the standard authoritative work on Jewish law throughout the Jewish diaspora, and it informed the structure of halakha, the organization of responsa collections and halachic digests, and also the process of halachic decision-making. That Shulchan Aruch was very often kind of the framework within which rabbis then were discussing if something is kosher or not, allowed or not, and so on. By frequently evoking, citing, reworking, and reinterpreting the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Ganzfried strengthens the halachic framework provided by this so fundamental code, but he also strengthens his own framework by using it. He consciously chooses this buzzword, Shulchan Aruch, its reputation as this widely accepted straightforward guide to help define the purpose of his own work, Kesed HaSofer, which he calls in his introduction a Shulchan Aruch for scribes, which is something that he writes here. This book will be organized in such a way that it will be like the Shulchan Aruch for the scribe. So this means that Gansfried viewed Kesed HaSofer as a work that should become, like the Shulchan Aruch, a definitive work, a standard code that scribes can refer to. They don't need to go anywhere else. And it really did. Kesed HaSofer had, in a very reduced form, a very similar fate to the Shulchan Aruch. There are expanded editions, elaborated editions, there are commentaries and super commentaries on it, and today it's widely accepted as the standard work on Jewish scribal law. Now, he also references earlier medieval Halakhic codes, like the Alba Turin, or Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, who was mentioned already, and he also quotes Maimonides, but both of which had also a very central role in the codification of scribal laws. But more intensively, though, he quotes and engages with a wide range of more recent, later commentaries and super commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, mostly Ashkenazi ones, like that of Rabbi Moses Isles or Rabbi Shabtai HaKohen, the Shach. But there's also the commentary Pri Chadash by the Livorno-born, Jerusalem-based Sephardi Rabbi Cheskia da Silva from the 17th century, and Leket HaKemach by Rabbi Moshe Chagiz, a Talmudic scholar and rabbi and Kabbalist in the 17th and 18th century, who lived in Jerusalem and also Amsterdam. The inclusion of these Sephardic commentaries like these is also traceable in scribal manuals published in the decades following Kesed HaSofer, such as Siach Sofer, Meir Nei Sofrim, and others. But it's very interesting that earlier practical scribal literature from Ashkenaz, for example, in the 18th century, don't engage as much with Sephardic sources beyond the Shulchan Aruch. So, for example, in Bnei Yonah, we don't see that much engagement with Sephardi commentary literature. Of course, Gansfried also references scribal practices mentioned in contemporary responsa, scribal practices that he observes among the scribes that he consults with, and they are added to his complex rewriting and reinterpretation of the Shulchan Aruch. But in cases of doubt, concern, or innovation, Gansfried will often conclude by referring to the framework of the Shulchan Aruch, such is the case in a ruling of Shelo Kesigran, which is a concept about tefillin. Happy to talk about that later. He adds some innovations and new ideas about this concept, and also about the whitening of parchment. But in the end, although he lists many arguments for his own chidush, for his own innovation, for his often leniency, it's the Shulchan Aruch that has the last word in Kesed HaSofer, not Gansfried himself. In view of the Shulchan Aruch as the defining framework for religious life and practice in both a halakhic and also a social sense, remember this buzzword I was talking about, this is really part of a wider approach that we can see in 19th century Orthodoxy, particularly in Hungary where Rabbi Gansfried lived. Using the Shulchan Aruch as a buzzword, Rabbi Gansfried responds to values and norms and recent developments within rabbinic and scribal culture, which drove for concrete and definitive frameworks. He relies on its halakhic force when providing scribes with a straightforward, widely accepted guide so that the scrolls they write will be accepted and deemed kosher too. His reliance on Sephardi legislation and commentary, be it the Mishnah Torah or the Shulchan Aruch, can also be explained through the differences in genre preference among Sephardi and Ashkenazi medieval rabbis, and Gansfried's aim of explaining practical law. While Ashkenazi medieval rabbis largely sought to write commentaries on the Talmud, for example, the Tosafists, harmonizing different opinions within the Talmud, be they of a halakhic or Gaelic nature, many Sephardi rabbis were particularly interested in understanding this larger system of halakha, prompting them to pen more structured codes that explicitly focus on practical Jewish law. And now, if you want to write a practical manual, it's probably easier to go to those codes already. But there are also responsa, which Gansfried quotes, and some of them are also of a Sephardic background. But if I look at the response that Gansfried quotes, I do need to make a disclaimer. Most of them are from the Ashkenazi area, made written by rabbis who served Ashkenazi communities. But the few Halakhic texts, this small number of texts that he quotes from rabbis with a Sephardi, Spanish and Portuguese, with a Greek, Italian or North African background, are responses that feature quite prominently in particular discussions. And many times it seems that these responses addressed core issues that otherwise have not really been explained so clearly, or have not been so accessible to Shlomo Gansfried. So I'll give you some examples, and I've brought some pictures with as well. So one of his most quoted responsa collections is that of Menachem Azari-Lafano, who was an Italian rabbi and Kabbalist from the 16th to 17th century. In a number of influential responsa on Tagin, Tefillin boxes, and Scribal corrections, he outlines practical issues that, from a rabbinic perspective, have not really been discussed in detail so far. When delineating, for example, the Halakhic nuances of the addition of Tagin on top of Hebrew letters, Lafano urges scribes to make sure Tagin are really connected to the Hebrew letters. So what he would say about the following is, that's all right, that's very good. This one here, where the Tagin have some gaps in between, that's not okay. Make sure that this is fixed. So this is what Menachem Azari-Lafano explains using a Halakhic language and turning Tagin, which is very often seen as a Scribal custom, something that's optional. He brings this into a Halakhic framework that Gansfried also adds into his discussions. There's another rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Alfandari, whose collection of responsa Magid Mereshit includes a very great amount of responsa. There's one which discusses the status of a lamed whose flag reaches into the letter chet in the line above, and the status of a letter which is swallowed up by another one. Now, I wasn't able to find this first case, because again, these are problematic cases, and ideally you would not find them in Torah scrolls. But something similar to the status of a lamed whose flag at the top hand reaches into another letter that's above the line is something you can find here. So again, these are different letters, but you have here the ha reaching into the space of the chet. The question is, is that okay? Because letters do need to have their own place and space. So if you read it, perhaps you will mistake this for something else. So that's one question. And the other question is a letter which is swallowed up by another one. And I found a very great picture of this in the Rhodes Torah Scroll online, where you see the nun somehow almost swallowing up the yud on here. And the question here, again, can we say that these are two letters, or perhaps would someone read this as perhaps a text that just missing something here, or an I, right? So while the first case would be no cause for concern according to most opinions, this is what also Magid Mereshit says about the lamed. The second one would need some fixing. What we see here is that Chaim Alfandari's approach is using is creating practical advice by using these theoretical discussions about the shapes of letters. And in this particular example, which has not, it seems, been discussed clearly elsewhere, because again, these responses often use case studies. These were added into the wealth of instructions by Rabbi Gansfried to address common scribal dilemmas. What do I do if my lamed was a bit too long? But it's not only advice and halakhic instruction on scribal errors that Sephardi rabbis contributed to in Kesser Sofer. Rabbi Samuel ben Moses de Medina, a 16th century Talmudist and author who lived in Thessaloniki and who was one of the most influential Sephardi scholars after the expulsion from Spain, is quoted prominently in Ganzfried's sections on parchment making, and here I'm somewhat connecting back to May's presentation. Ganzfried wants to make the point in his Kessler Sofer that non-Jewish participation in the parchment making process is okay, as long as there's a Jew who knows about the laws of Sepharad, who can supervise everything. This is because it seems that in Hungary in the 19th century, scribes had to increasingly rely on non-Jewish tanners and parchment makers, or also on Jewish parchment makers who were not particularly religious, did not care much about, or did not know much about all these rules that parchment needs to fulfill. While influential earlier Sephardic authorities like Maimonides sought to severely limit the participation of non-Jews in the parchment making process, Ashkenazi authorities generally are less concerned with the participation of non-Jews in this process. So having one more lenient Sephardic source in this discussion is something that adds more Halakhic grounding to this more lenient position, saying that, well, it was not just Ashkenazi rabbis who allowed this, but there's also Rabbi Samuel ben Moses de Medina, who thinks that's okay as well. So Ganzfried's referral to this opinion also shows that there was a common ground between them. They shared their respective situations. They were lacking Jewish skilled tanners, even though, and had similar opinions, even though they lived miles apart and centuries apart as well. There are also some Sephardic Kabbalistic texts that are quoted in Kessler Sofer and Masoretic text by Yedida Dorsi or even a Pisa, but these have fewer practical implications for scribes, so I didn't want to focus on those so much. My last point refers to the reception of Kessler Sofer, and here we see a little turn in what I've been describing as this move from Sepharad into Halakhic Ashkenazi manuals. I'd like to therefore highlight some of Kessler Sofer's afterlife, a little glimpse into that reception, which I'm also studying. Sepharad and Ashkenazi manuals in the 19th century found their opposite counterparts, Ashkenaz and Sephardic manuals, from the 20th century onwards. In 1903, Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer of Baghdad, Talmudist and rabbinic authority, but not a scribe himself, even though his name might indicate that he's a scribe, published Kol Yaakov, a practical commentary on those chapters in the Shulchan Aruch dealing with scribal matters. One of his main sources is Kessler Sofer, and in many cases he follows Ganzfried's ruling, which again is not Ashkenazi, it's a mix of Ashkenazi and Sephardic sources, but then again generally portrays advice and practices that are prevalent in Eastern Hungary. What's interesting though is that Sofer occasionally leaves behind traditional Sephardic rulings and practices. Instead, he refers to the Ashkenazi practices named, among others, in Kessler Sofer. Concerning parchment making, for example, Rabbi Sofer only ever explains Ashkenazi traditions. This choice may indicate the institutionalization of Ashkenazi scribal manuals, such as Kessler Sofer, but it could also be reflective of economic and material changes in the Ottoman Empire, which requires scribes to rely on faster and slightly cheaper ways of producing Torah scrolls. This is a question I'm still researching about, which also relates to parchment making in the land of Israel during the Ottoman Empire. So there are not so many sources about this, but I hope I'll track them down. So to conclude, Kessler Sofer shows that in the modern period, Sephardi Halakhic texts became the infrastructure and the textual archive for scribal knowledge, through which Ashkenazi scribal practice was standardized in the 19th century. This emerges from a reading of Kessler Sofer that takes special interest in the origin of Psak, in the origins of and the cultural context of Halakhic rulings, providing both conceptual structure and detailed intricacies to the educational rendering of Jewish scribal practice. Sephardi authorities in Kessler Sofer contribute greatly to this and other modern Ashkenazi manuals. They add to the more general, more dispersed notes on Jewish scribal practice in earlier Ashkenazi sources. Ganzfried repeatedly reaches out across geography and across culture to create an accessible manual. He references Ashkenazi sources, be they of purely Halakhic or conceptual or Kabbalistic or practical nature, to this because they seem to be available this is available, usable legal knowledge, easily accessible to Gansplit, and practical advice, which is also quite popular. Gansplit sought to systematically rewrite and update the Shulchan Aruch for scribes, and adds countless early modern Sephardi sources due to their Halakhic clarity and his appreciation for the Sephardi tradition, often seen as more rational and systematic. His pragmatic approach to Halakhic writing was channeled to fill a much-needed gap in practical scribal literature in the early 19th century. This rendition, analysis, and comparison of Sephardi and Ashkenazi legal texts and the convergence of local scribal practice and Sephardi practice is a key feature of Kessler Sofer and other 19th century Ashkenazi scribal manuals. Thus, Kessler Sofer's Sephardi sources show how authority travels across cultures, and looking at the reception of Kessler Sofer, we also see how then Central European scribal literature impacts Sephardi ones, such as in Kol Yaakov. Thank you.
Questions? Maybe only one or two questions, because there's a concert. I have a little question, just small, and there's another question.
For sure.
You two.
I don't have a question, just a very tiny comment. I'm from America, and I belong still, even though I live here, to a very small congregation which has gone from Orthodox to conservative to now Reform. And the Reform movement in this synagogue is now adopting into the Ashkenazi practice great many practices from the Sephardic community. I don't know why, but this is happening now. So
this is very interesting. I think I mentioned this here on the slide today. Modern Israeli Psak. It's something that we see in the state of Israel now, that something of Minhag Medinat Israel is being established, which is not Sephardi, not Ashkenazi. It's a merging of traditions, because with the Siddur of the military as well, where you have many different traditions kind of coming together and being there on an equal level, so that everyone who comes to a synagogue feels welcome, for example, in terms of liturgy. So it's a quite interesting way of looking at how these things merge. You see points where they merge, points where they diverge, and at the moment we are at the point of merging again.
If I could just make a comment. I found it very interesting how Gansplit looked back to Maimonides and the like, the Shulchan Aruch, and then his book was received in Baghdad, of all places, and like from Central Europe looked back to an older period, and then it went to a classic Sephardi community, and they kind of adopted an Ashkenazic way, if I can put it that, which is in itself was a mix. So that's all.
Thank you.
It's interesting the merge, the kind of the intermingling of these traditions and how they travel.
Yeah, definitely. I think if at the beginning, when I was doing this research, I didn't really notice. I was just looking for sources and I put them together. And then I had this list once, and it asked me to compile a list of all the sources that I found at Kessler Sofer. And suddenly I see, where all these people are coming from, and you really see this. It's also often called the Rabbinic Republic of Letters, this really international network of rabbis through, transcending borders and transcending time, where you have, a rabbi kind of sitting in the Beit Midrash with, figuratively, Maimonides on his side, and this rabbi from Thessaloniki and this rabbi from Lithuania, and they all engage with each other in some way or the other. Yeah.
Annett, do you want?
I later.
Most of the halachot you were kind of mentioning were about the ink, the parchment, the writing. What about the sofer? What are the demands, the halachic demands, that would qualify or disqualify a person from being the sofer?
So you're asking this as a general question, or how that differs in terms of Ashkenazi and Sephardi?
I don't know if you can just tell us a bit
Yeah.
about the halachot that apply to the sofer as a person. The Godesh,
right. So generally, when it comes to a scribe, according to the Talmud and kind of Rishonim and Achronim, early medieval and later authorities, a scribe is a man who can write and who can read, who is above the age of 13, and who is God-fearing. 13, yeah. 13, 1, 3, yeah. Right. It's and he needs to be God-fearing, and he needs to be able to have kavanah in order to produce texts lishma, for the sake of God. There's a question of whether a scribe needs to be right-handed or not. So there's some discussion and some opinions who say, oh, if you are lefty, then you can't write the Torah Scroll. I think nowadays that's people don't care much about this anymore. And in there's a discussion of whether women can write Torah Scrolls, Tefillin, Meshunnot, and so on. And yeah, there are a wide range of opinions about that. When it comes to Ashkenazi and Sephardi opinions about this, I think because it's such a fundamental question, and it once you've done all the requirements, there's no more discussion, so you don't have such big differences in Sephardi or Ashkenazi practices. But